Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith, and I've made some tier lists in the past. Certainly it's been some of my more popular content, but oftentimes we get people disagreeing what tier a unit's going to be in. That makes sense, but I think a better question to ask then is why do we tier units the way we do? Why do tier lists matter? I mean, they don't technically matter, but what matters in a tier list? So consider this a basic guide or explanation of what a tier list is, what a tier list isn't, and what tier lists might look like if we consider different things as important. So, what's taken into consideration in a tier list? First of all, you want to discuss what type of tier list you're making. Is it an efficiency tier list? Is it a first-time playable tier list? Is it an LTC tier list? Is it a drafting tier list? What's the availability of a unit like? Are you counting availability against units? If a unit comes late, does that make them a worse unit than if they come early? Versus, are we just rating the units? Is it a character guide? Are we rating the units based on when they show up? Would you like to use them? So game knowledge comes into effect. Is this for a new player? Is this for a veteran player? Is this for an expert in a specific game? There's a lot of interesting foibles that can come across for tier lists through that. Are we considering things like glitch use? In Fire Emblem 1, this is a really big matter are you considering glitch use in terms of the infinite defense glitch for Manakets? Are you considering the talisman glitches? If you're considering them, that may drastically change the tiering of the units that can make use of them. For Game Boy Advance games like this, are we considering like Torch Glitch or Mine Glitch or stuff like that? Because that can also impact units. In games with open access to grinding, Sacred Stones being one of them, are we considering grinding at all as a possibility? Generally speaking, tier lists don't. They like to claim on like an efficiency standpoint. But if you throw that out, say, hey, you can grind as much as you want, the tier list looks very different, and I'm going to show that in a second. Are we considering recruitment cost? Generally speaking, tier lists don't when you're tiering a unit, but sometimes it comes into play. For instance, does a unit cost a lot of money to recruit? Do they cost a lot of money to promote? Could use that money for other things. Fire Emblem 7, Dart, and Farina, this matters a lot for. Farina is 10,000 gold. Dart, the Ocean Seal, costs 50,000 gold. Are you using them or not? That depends. But generally speaking, you don't consider the unit's cost when rating them. But sometimes you do, so you need to ask that question as well. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that what can a unit do that other units can't do? This often comes down to things like stats, classes, weapon ranks, etc., but can also come into play with things like flying, staff use, availability. Are they a good boss killer? In games with skills, do they have good unique skills? In Three Houses, do they learn good combat arts? Stuff like that. These are all things to consider, and I wanted to show what some tier lists might look like if you consider things differently. So I have 3 different tier lists here. We have what I would consider kind of a general purpose, somewhat efficiency-based tier list. We have an LTC or draft mode tier list. And we have what I'm gonna call what would even be the term for this? Potential tier list? This is the monstrosity, and I'll get back to it later. So, first of all, the general purpose tier list, these are the types of tier lists you're going to see most often by far. They're going to rank units, they're going to consider availability, they're going to consider what a unit does well, what a unit does poorly. They're going to consider efficiency as part of it. They're not necessarily going to be like, hey, this is a LTC, but this is going to be, okay, you're going through all the chapters, you're trying to play pretty quickly, you're not wanting to sit around and waste time, you just kind of want to get through the game as easy as possible, you don't want to have to stop and grind. That's generally what the tier lists are, and so for that, for Sacred Stones, which is the game I'm most familiar with, personally, you have something like, okay, Seth is at the top because it's Seth. You have some S tiers, which are very good units in their own right, can basically carry the game once they get going or once you get them. And your dancer, because having a dancer is almost always a fantastic thing to have, in most situations. A tiers, units that are just solid, no matter what you do with them. B tiers, units that provide some good utility, but might not always be kind of like optimal choices for every map. C tiers, this is when you start getting into, okay, unit does some things well, but falls short on others, or maybe they're not super available, or maybe they're just kind of not really where you want them to be. D tier, these units can provide some decent support in specific places, but they may be hard to get going, they may not really do what you want them to, or they may be very limited availability, like Orson. E tier, these units just have a tough time getting going, not saying that you can't use them, but they generally struggle. And then the F tier, this is units that generally take more effort to raise than they're going to give you in the long term. Now, this is not to say that these units are unusable, that these units are horrible, that these units, that you can't have fun with them, that you're wrong to like using these units. No, Ewan is one of my favorite units by far. I absolutely love Ewan. Also, by the way, music in the background is the Lo-Fire Emblem 2 mix, just put out by Mecha. It's fantastic. I highly recommend that. Link in the description below. But yeah, this is not to say that Ewan and Naomi are like, you shouldn't use them or you're bad for using them. No, not at all. This tier list just says it's gonna be more difficult. The game will tend to be on the more difficult side if you use units like Ewan and Naomi over units like Franz and Cormac. That's what the efficiency tier list is really all about. If you want to play the game at a higher level, say an LTC or a draft race or something like that, or speedrun, you might consider a tier list that looks something like this. Now granted, I don't play at these levels, so this is mostly from watching people and gathering some information. Don't take this tier list as canon, this is just like an example of what one might look like. Again, I threw these together in like 5 minutes. This is not a guaranteed tier list, but for Sacred Stones you'd have, okay, Seth, how do you really tier Seth? Again, you can't necessarily qualify him. You'll generally have a non-Seth carry unit, especially if you're doing a draft, especially if, draft or LTC or something, or speedrun. Vanessa's big in the speedrun because she flies and Seth doesn't. Utility, you're going to have a lot of units that have some use as utility units. Thieves, clerics, dancers, all these units will help you achieve your goal, but they're not necessarily going to be your core unit, your 1 or 2 units that you really want to use. There's some miscellaneous combat units. Sometimes you just need to throw someone in who can fight something, and this is good. Always good to have one. And then you'll end up with, at around half the cast, everyone else just kind of sitting on the bench being like, you could throw them into miscellaneous combat, but they don't necessarily shine as well as the other ones. I only have Ross in here, for example, because he could be a pirate and there's some utility there, so maybe he should be in utility, but I figured it's more combat utility than anything else. But yeah, so you end up with this giant stratification between the units that are top tier and the units that are top tier, the units that provide some unique support, and everyone else. And so that's when you consider, air quote, top level LTC strats, something like that, this is what they're thinking when they're going through a tier list. Again, maybe not exactly this, just kind of the general thing. But then you have the ultra casual tier list. This is what I would call the potential tier list. This is what a tier list would look like if you listened to all the comments of people saying, endgame matters, only endgame matters. What if you made a tier list for creature campaign, basically? Infinite grinding, let people do whatever they want with their units, let them come out however they want, however they do. This is the nonsense you would get. Cormag being top of the tier. Yuan, Ross, even Amelia, pretty high up. Units like Seth, well, it's a little bit lower because he's still Seth. Seth's still amazing. But units like the Thieves, like Cyrene, far lower than they otherwise would be because while they provide some good utility if you need them to, in like a no grinding sense, in a, you know, just playing each chapter as it comes sense, they could come in and be a decent filler, or a decent flying support, or whatever. This tier list doesn't care about that because they're all about what are your endgame stats like. If I were to, this is the type of thing people think about when they're like, okay, I want to like prepare a team for multiplayer, for Link Arena or for Fates multiplayer or whatever. They just want to know what unit can get to the best endgame stats easiest. And what unit can, you know, I don't care how long it takes me to grind up the unit, what am I going to get at the end? And that's more of what this tier list does for you. That's more of what this tier list shows. Is it right? Is it wrong? Well, no, but it's different. I'm pretty sure anyone can tell that this tier list and this tier list are very different from each other. There's a lot of similarities in some things, because there are some units that start weak and don't necessarily get super strong. There's some units that start strong and stay strong. There's some units that are available the whole games. There's some units that aren't. You know, there are some similarities between these tier lists, but I really wanted to point this out because I'm tired of getting comments saying that Nino is S tier, she's a beast, she can become the strongest sage in the game. This may be technically true, but she has 3 chapters to do it in? It's not worth it. Nino, in FE7, is an F tier, maybe an E tier at best. But if you were to go with something like this monstrosity, this potential tier list, Nino would be top of the pack. Because why wouldn't she be? She's the best sage. You can invest into her all you want. She's easy to invest in. The game makes you want to invest into her. You can see what I mean, right? So yeah, tier lists, generally speaking, this is what people mean when they talk about a tier list. An efficiency tier list, a how, you know, roughly how easy is it to beat the game with these units tier list. This is what LTCers think when they are talking about, like, is a unit good, is a unit bad? They're very strictly stratified, and most of the cast is not even considered. And this is what the general layperson thinks of a tier list before they're really in bed in the Fire Emblem community. Because it's potential. Because this is all potential. And Fire Emblem makes you care about unit potential, especially newer Fire Emblem games. You really want to care about that unit potential. You don't want to waste experience. You want to power up the units that are going to make the best use of it, you know? And so, yeah, I get it. I totally get it. You know, are these the only 3 types of tier lists? No. Like I said, Mecha's done a lot of character guides, which are tier lists that they're basically efficiency tier lists that don't take availability into account at all. And they just say, is a unit going to help you? Is a unit going to make it harder? And how? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, link to the music in the description below. Sub to the channel if you enjoy this type of stuff. Let me know if you want any more information about tier lists, any more information about Fire Emblem. I will love to talk about this series, and so yeah, just give me a like, subscribe to the channel. Till then, this is Mythos Zenith signing out.